everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the Ice. Wayne's World Edition is going to be coming up with us here. Just part one of one. Wayne Kosior is going to join me to talk about his mental performance webinar that took place last night, as well as the importance of some definitions and some concerns that may arise when it comes to players, parents, and organizations with what players hear from an organization and the words that are used. And we're going to try and define some of those words with regards to players and their protection towards and with organizations, how important it is to maybe be that free agent in this offseason. Plus, we'll take a quick look at the World Junior Championships, and we'll see how that worked out for everybody in Edmonton and Red Deer, and how forward we're looking to -30 and watching it on our couches come Christmas time. So on the ice here, we'll welcome Wayne Kosior with Wayne's World right after this. Wayne Kosior joining me. Wayne, catch some strep after that webinar last night?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great evening. And I guess, for our viewers that may or may not have attended, we had a little bit of a hot stove format last night for the first time. And so we had 3 other panelists that joined me and I moderated. So we had Ryan Ginter, who's the head scout for the Winnipeg Ice in the WHL. He's also a sports psychologist. And it leads our practice in mental performance coaching at Trailblazer Hockey. So he was one of the panelists. And then we had Nevin Marquardt, who's our chief operating officer, and of course, a longtime Boston Bruin, and then longtime NHL agent Rich Winter. So, we just kind of talked about all the things surrounding mental performance, how it's important in the game. And then, heard some great stories from Nevin and Rich. They always have some of the good old NHL stories as it relates to those types of things. So we had a ton of laughs and reminiscence from old times. And so I think our audience enjoyed it from what I'm hearing in response and stuff. So it was a great evening.
Yeah, mental performance is, obviously well tied into the physical performance of any sport. But I can recall just having that focus and how impressive it is to see and have those words prior to a game or a practice, as opposed to having nothing involved and not having that preparations. And fortunately, I had a chance to be working with Dr. Cal Botterill, longtime sports psychologist of several NHL teams, and Jason Botterill's dad, Jennifer Botterill's dad. So long story short, just having the words with him throughout my career was quite impressive. Tell me what some of the stories, Wayne, that kind of went through and how it related to getting onto this topic and how important it was to have this panel together to discuss this important issue.
Well, I guess first and foremost, as far as, why we had this, we just think it's probably the most overlooked component in a player's development and training. And yet we think it's probably the most important one. So that's a big gap there. And so, bottom line is players are they're training in the gym, they're taking power skating, they're following proper nutrition and all this stuff. But, everybody's doing that. So how do you create a difference between your competition? As you go up to the higher levels of hockey, the positions get less and less, so you got to get better and better. And so we really think that mental focus is where you can bridge that gap the most. And I think the players that are most successful are making use of it. And, mental performance is kind of a, misnomer that many people kind of don't know what it means. And you can be described 100 million different ways, but it's as simple as just laying on your couch in some cases and trying to visualize the game you're going to play that night and players you're going to face, how you're going to have to react from different things you anticipate and stuff like that. And, to more detailed kind of, getting some basis of how do you focus in the game? How do you overcome and keep your confidence, like overcome, disappointment and we make a mistake, all those things kind of play into mental performance. And probably many players to some levels are doing something about it. But until you really do it, logically and in a detailed format with somebody like a Ryan Ginter or the individuals you mentioned that understand that totally, I don't think you can benefit from it fully. So that was a high level of why we had it. Obviously Ryan's a specialist in that area. He is our mental performance coach for Trailblazer Hockey. So all of our clients that are partaking in his sessions utilize him. So that's been a great add to Trailblazer Hockey. And of course, Nevin Marquardt, we wanted to hear from him, both from a hockey perspective and a business perspective. I mean, here's a guy that went to the NHL, played 9 years, very, very successful, and then went into business and a very successful businessman. And, the whole mental performance, mental focus is applicable to both his hockey career and success and his business career and success. So, it's a transferable skill, and it's important in much more than hockey. And of course, Rich Winter is an NHL agent that's represented hundreds of players. Rich is a big believer in the whole mental performance thing, and shared some detailed stories on his thoughts on it, how he works with players, and some of the funnier stories were just about some of the players that Rich represented. Some related to mental focus, some were just kind of funny stories about players that came up. And Nevin Markwood always has a few good stories and a few laughs from his playing days and stuff. And so it was just a great evening.
Ryan has a wealth of interest in this topic, of course, because not only does he write books on it, but he works with a lot of athletes that are making that next step. Tangibles, intangibles, did that come up last night as well? Because I know that's a big thing that we've discussed about Ryan and his work lately.
Yeah, not too much. We just focus more on Ryan's side of the mental performance coaching, but certainly, Ryan is a recognized expert in those scouting for intangibles, and he did write a book on that. But we focused in on the expertise that Ryan carries in the mental performance, because really that's what we wanted the focus on type thing is how to help our players from that perspective. And like I say, Ryan is just an amazing individual as far as just his knowledge and stuff. I mean, it is off the charts, and I think it's hard to find an academic like him, if I can use that term, that has his multiple degrees, his master's, like I say, in sports psychology, and yet a strong hockey background. Right, he works heavily in hockey, and so for our hockey players, we think it's a huge advantage. He understands what the game's all about, and obviously is that expert in that sports psychology side of things.
They say we make between 25 and 35,000 decisions a day. Most of those are autonomic. Some of those are meant to be happening. But the bottom line is, if we're sitting on a couch and we're trying to replay the game in our head, we are still thinking, right? We are doing something positive.
Yeah,
the process takes some time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It takes practice, like most things and stuff. And like I say, I can't overstress your point that you make there again. Laying on the couch, you can be doing this stuff instead of looking at your stupid smartphone and surfing Twitter and trash. Think about things like that. It can make a big difference. And one story I'll share that I shared with the group last night, that just a simple example and something that I used with my son Landon, is it just came to shootouts. And it drives me crazy when I see these younger kids go to shootouts and they see stuff on TV that Connor McDavid or somebody's done or whatever, and they're trying to dipsy doodle, they're swinging around, and they got 10,000 things going on in their brain, but none of them connecting, and that's the issue. And so I kind of said to Landon, I mean, you got to pre-wire your brain, and that's where we say we have to make so many decisions. If you pre-wire it, you're making those decisions in advance, almost pre-wire that so that it can happen faster. And so the example is, I said, in a shootout, from my perspective, there's two options: you're shooting or you're deacon. Okay, so keep it simple like that. Don't stress about, okay, I remember seeing that on Sports Center last night, I'm going to do this and do that. Well, you can't make decisions that quick on the fly. So bottom line is, I told him, if you're ever in a shootout, the goalie's deep, you shoot. If he's out, you deep. That's two options. I mean, your brain can make that in a millisecond, right? And, I think it helped him. I mean, it was great last year when he got a shootout, and, he was the final shooter and went in and scored. And, I think it was a lot of, he didn't do anything fancy. Skated in, watched to see what the goalie was doing. His brain told him what was the right decision, and execute.
You can be fancy when the puck crosses the goal line. That's the bottom line. That's when you can be fancy. Not like Applebee's, but the bottom line is, like you said, that's how I taught my kids. I mean, if you saw the goalie outside the blue paint and you're ready to make your move, you're deacon. If he's deep in the blue paint, guess what you're doing? You're firing up Ty Domi style and going top shelf for the mama hides the cookies. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure.
And goalies hated it because I tell them beforehand, I said, if you're outside during practice, I loved it because I ended every practice I coached with a shootout. I picked 5 different guys every time. It's a small story. And I'd say, guys, here's the deal. You're not making any moves. You're not doing anything except one thing. You're looking at the goalie. When that goalie is there, or where he is on the ice, and when you're making your move, that is your decider. And the other 10 players on the ice would then say, okay, did he make the right decision? And we would all sit on the bench together and we would say, no, 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 or yes, yes, yes. And that's where we decided, okay, this is how we're going to perform in our shootouts. And it worked out fairly well. So, yes, Wayne,
awesome.
Good coaching by Landon. I liked it. I thought it was good.
Yeah, great.
Let's get on to topic number 2 here, because this is a little bit more important, talking about what we talked about last week with the NCAA clearinghouse and players what is this, for a player's perspective? Let's talk about that first, and then we'll go to the organization's perspective. How important is it for a player to say that they've been listed, protected, as opposed to being the free agent or having another commitment sort of style from an organization?
Well, I mean, first thing is kind of just all the terminology. I think players and parents need to understand that, and it's probably one of the more confusing and challenging things for younger players and families as they move up the food chain. You threw some of the terms around: listed, protected, mean a lot of the same thing. So, in most of the leagues, in the WHL, junior A leagues, is, most organizations can protect you or list you as a player. And that means no other team can sign you or have you play type thing until you're released from that list. So that's pretty straightforward. And then there's always letters of intent that happen quite a bit at spring camps and going into leading into main camps. And, a lot of people get excited about letters of intent, but ultimately they really don't mean anything. It's just that, hey, if you have a great camp and we like what we see, you make the team. And that's the same as any free agent that comes to that camp. If you have a great camp and they like what they see, they'll sign you. So, I think letters of intent are used a lot by teams and coaches just to give a little bit of a confidence to the player, maybe help keep them on the line, and so kind of a two-way street on that one. Of course, a signed player is a signed player. That's when they actually sign you to a Hockey Canada player card in Canada, which basically, you only get so many cards as a team. And once you sign a player, that card is committed to that player. It can't be switched over to another player. If you want to release that player, that card is essentially burnt. You can't refill it. So, there's a serious commitment when you get signed. So that's the key thing. And then I guess, as you get into college, then you start talking about the verbal commitments and then, actually signing your, national letter of intent to go into the college the year that you're going to go in and stuff. And, there's usually lots of confusion around the verbal commitment, which again, just like verbal commitments don't really mean a lot unless it's written on paper and it's signed off that you're committed. Verbal commitments at the college level really just mean that now no other teams can communicate with you and try to recruit you, but there really is no commitment from the player or the team until you sign that national letter of intent that you're going to go into the college that particular year. And so again, just lots of confusion around that. And like I say, those are just some of the high level terms. And, we deal with this a lot with a lot of our players and parents, helping them to educate them and walk them through that.
So, Wayne, if you, let's say you're a listed player in a junior or Western Hockey League program, and you're still thinking, you're on the fence of potentially going Div 1 or Div 3 to the States, should you be discussing that with your organization, or should you be making those decisions? Or is there a way you can say, no, you know what, I don't want to be listed, or I don't want to be protected from a player's perspective because I may have vested interest in going to play NCAA hockey later on in my life?
Yeah. From a list perspective, there's really no danger to the player because you're not committing to anything. So no real risk, but it's just, I think it's important always that players and teams are communicating back and forth in a two-way manner. Because to say a Western Hockey League team lists you as a player, but that you're going to go NCAA, it's just there's no doubt about it. I just think it's only proper and fair that you advise the team of that. And certainly I'm sure the team would be asking you that. And they still may choose to list you because people do change their mind, things change and stuff like that. But again, just being open and honest that way. If you get listed with a junior A team, of course, that's great. If you want to go NCAA, that's kind of the typical pathway to go through to there and stuff like that. So, I guess the summary would be that to get listed by a team is really not an issue at all. It's more when you start to sign some of these agreements that then you're seriously committing, and that can limit some of your pathways and avenues you can pursue going forward.
You said that progression into the different leagues is so important. Many different ways to get that done. And if you need any advice or advising with that, I would say Trailblazer Hockey is one of those groups to get in contact with because, like you said, it gets very confusing with all these different terminologies being thrown around, Wayne. Even I still get confused sometimes. So it happens, right?
Yeah, and there's one other thing that we should probably just dovetail onto this if I can, Theo, is that then you start talking about USA versus Canada, and again, there's always big confusion there. And so there's also sanctioned and non-sanctioned hockey. And when we say sanctioned, that's usually the national governing body. And in Canada, that's Hockey Canada. In the US, it's USA Hockey. And so if you want to leave a team in Hockey Canada to play with a team that's sanctioned in USA Hockey, which would be like North American Hockey League or the USHL, you do eventually need to get a release from whichever organization you're leaving. And there has to be a transfer fee that's paid to get you released. And that's typically in that $4,000 range. But that's when you're playing sanctioned hockey. Now, if you're going non-sanctioned, and we'll talk about the USA side of things, non-sanctioned hockey would be like the NCDC, which is the National Collegiate Development Conference, or the USPHL. You can leave any Hockey Canada league or team. You don't need any kind of release, nothing. You just go, sign, it's done, because they're essentially two different entities and stuff. So, just another little angle to mention that, because I know there's more and more players are crossing the border to pursue their goals and dreams, and that's always an issue that comes up. So I thought it was relevant to share.
No, I really appreciate that, because sanctioned, non-sanctioned hockey is definitely growing north and south of the border, where we're seeing lots of different players looking at it and saying, well, this is, from a geographic perspective, from a playing perspective, from time on ice perspective, these teams are giving me more of an opportunity compared to having that, status of playing in a top tier junior A NCAA and playing fourth line, if you will. So it doesn't really help the development of the player, but it helps, it gives you that, that crown, if you will, if you're playing Div 1 hockey, but you're barely playing. So
Right.
something to mention for, absolutely. Have you started to see, Wayne, a feeder program within like junior A programs or sanctioned and non-sanctioned hockey organizations, where some of them are, working as a AAA NCDC program and then getting them connected into Div 3, Div 1 programs in the States?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. And I think, a good example would be, when I was on the East Coast of the US, end of July, attended a couple of North American League camps in Maryland at the Black Bears, and then New Jersey Titans. And both of them really kind of are building an ecosystem. And I think more and more that's what we're seeing, particularly in the US, is, so if you look at the Maryland Black Bears, the same gentleman, Murray Gunty, that owns that organization, also owns the Youngstown Phantoms in the USHL. So again, you can see that connection there, where they're going to flow players. And then Murray also owns the NCDC, which is Mercer, another New Jersey-based team, Mercer Chiefs. And so players that maybe can't make the Maryland Bears are steered kind of the Mercer Chiefs in the NCDC. And then it just kind of goes down from there. And, same thing has happened in New Jersey Titans. They kind of got the U15, U17, U18. Then they got the North American 3 League. Then they got the North American League team. And so, again, they're just kind of moving those bodies up and down between those different levels. And, it helps because players that come into those organizations at the lower levels are typically learning the same systems that are going to be used at the higher levels. So there's some benefit to that. And of course, for these teams, it's kind of a built-in pipeline of players. So certainly that's the way we see it evolving in the US, and, to a lesser extent, I think a little bit here in Canada.
I certainly think that's going to be the model of the future when it comes to players being committed to the game, but then realizing they have a place. They just have to progress through those levels to then finally reach their possibly attained level at the end of their careers. Do we want to touch quickly on the World Juniors? Did you have a chance to catch that final game, Wayne?
Yeah, I caught most of the game, and certainly the most exciting stuff there in the overtime. So again, it was a great match after what was kind of, a relatively lackluster event happening in the middle of summer, which we know in the Northern Hemisphere, we want to maximize as much time as possible being outdoors and enjoying the sunshine and warmth. But yeah, it was a great game and just a fantastic finish. And, I enjoyed it, and I still can't believe that play that McTavish made at the end to keep that goal out. That's going to be being replayed 50 years from now, after probably you and I are both long gone, but amazing.
Well, you remember Henderson in 72, Eberle, whenever that was, and now this one that wasn't the goal. It was the goal that saved the goal. And I tell you, just when you'd love to see, not to be a Finnish hater and like that, but when you see the Finnish player raising his hands, knowing that it's in the net, going in, and then out of nowhere, this stick knocks it down, and from every angle shows that it did not cross a red line. And then for them to score literally seconds later is like, just bliss. I mean,
Yeah.
I said it several times. If Canada doesn't win this World Hockey Championship, it's it's an ultimate loss. Not just a lackluster performance by the whole organization, but it's just a complete loss.
Yeah.
But I too, Wayne, am looking forward to December because that's when this is supposed to be played. I think for a lot of these players, from a performance aspect, yes, they all performed extremely well. They were asked to play for nation. But what do you think it does to them for their progression now going into normal timetable, normal schedule, getting into their, Western Hockey League affiliates, their potential NHL tryouts, their NHL development program? Does this put a bit of a hiccup or a bit of a hiatus on that, or have they been able to plan around that for these last 2 weeks that have occurred in Edmonton and Red Deer?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of the players because I'm sure it's going to be an emotional letdown when you kind of leave that type of atmosphere and then go back to whichever your WHL camp or wherever you're heading to and stuff. But many of those guys are going to the drafted ones are going to go on to NHL camp shortly after the WHL camp starts. So again, that's going to be good for them and stuff. But it definitely just doesn't seem normal. I mean, playing that elite hockey in the summertime. There was a lot of the big name players that were missing that should have been playing there. Like, a Caden Gooley comes instantly to mind, and Jake Neighbors and those guys, right? But, just their NHL teams wouldn't release them. It was supposed to be their tournament. So, a lot of these guys that we've seen in this tournament, we're probably going to see them at Christmas time again. And that's great. And I think we'll both look forward to it a whole lot more then when it's cold out and it seems like, it's Boxing Day. Well, that means the World Juniors is starting and it's going to be a great tournament. And, I always think some of the best hockey of the year. So I always look forward to it. And I think just a good news story at the end of the day with all the stuff that's happening in Hockey Canada and stuff there. It just was nice to kind of see some positive news.
Absolutely. I look at it from the perspective that some of these players now are going to be playing upwards of an extra 16 full games in their 22-23 campaign, on top of them potentially playing in playoffs, call-ups, going back and forth between the N and the A. It's a lot of extra hockey for these players. And I mean, granted, the NHL season is 84 games or 82 games. The WHL is 60, 65 games without playoffs. So you look at a guy like Connor Bedard, for example. I mean, he had an okay tournament, performance-wise, but here's a kid that had every spotlight on his entire playing career the last 2 weeks. Now the spotlight moves to Regina. Then the spotlight comes back to the World Juniors at Christmas time if he wants to. And then it goes into part two, second half of the season back in Regina. And then, of course, they expect to make the playoffs because they're an older team. Seattle looks really good. Winnipeg and Brandon should have good teams, as should, Swift Current. So, I mean, you look at all these teams, especially in the East Division, and just how much extra games have been played for these players. It's something I will be watching over the course of this season for sure.
Yeah, it's less than ideal. I think from a body health perspective, that's a lot of wear and tear on a young body. And I regretfully think that down the road we're going to see issues with some of these young players that have been doing hockey 12 months a year since they've been literally 10 years old, and that's not good. And I read a little bit of stuff with some doctors and scientists that have done studies on it, and it's just not a good thing long term. And I think it even could happen in the season. Some of these guys are going to be gassed by the time if they're in a playoff run and it's May and they're still playing after they played through August or all this. Their bodies are going to start breaking down.
Yeah, they're spent, in the other words, just mentally broken down, which was something you maybe probably discussed last night as well. So, Wayne, appreciate the time tonight. Really, thank you so much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure, Theo. I always look forward to chatting hockey with you.
We'll see you next week, my friend.
Same you.
And that was Wayne Kosior here with TrailblazerHockeyAdvisors.com. Their website, their webinar was up last week. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight, discussing the ideas of mental performance on the ice, as well as within types of any profession you do. Having your focus is truly important, as well as discussing World Juniors and, of course, the intangibles of being a player agent, free agent, or being listed, of course, going across the border, north and south. And Wayne does bring up a very important part of the USA Hockey sanctioned, non-sanctioned just as much as important here in Canada as well. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Doug Spoke Fields, Case Financial Group, and Toby Hockey for joining us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later on in the week. Take care of yourself, bringing more goodness to the greatness here on ASTV. We'll see you later. Have a good one for now. Bye-bye.